KT1 RUN. I am 10 minutes from the park entrance.
KT1 RUN from N7IYT. Noted.
Hey, good morning guys, I'm the Tech Prepper, hope you're all doing well. In the last video I shared with you the planning I was doing for my first public service event, and today we're going to talk about the event details, the timeline, the experiences, and a little bit of an after action report so you can get a sense for the experience. So last weekend there was a 2-day ultra marathon called the Javelina 100 or the Javelina 100. And it basically consisted of a 100-mile course, a 100-kilometer course, and then 2, I believe, 30K night runs. And it took place in the McDowell Mountain Regional Park, and they had like a 20-mile loop that they set up. So the 100-milers ran that 5 times, the 100K guys roughly 3 times for about 60 miles. And it was just a lot of fun. It's a themed race. I met everybody from Elvis to Iron Man on that race. Had a great time with MCECG, the Maricopa County Emergency Communications Group, which was the group I was involved with, the event staff, the medical team, the runners. Everybody was fantastic, and I encourage everybody to do it. Now, my goal for this event was to test myself mentally, physically, and also move the needle in my communication skills as a dry run for emergency communications. And I think it was largely successful. We'll talk about what did not go well, what went well, what I'm going to change for next time. So let's jump right into it. Let's start with the timeline actually. So it was a 2-day event, Saturday and Sunday. We were shorthanded in terms of ham radio operators, so some of us were asked if we could work a double shift. I ended up working 3 shifts, which I really enjoyed. I was having so much fun. I didn't take the break in between, and ended up working 24 hours, which is not typical for these events. This was a personal decision I made, so please don't equate public service with you have to work 24 hours in a row. I just wanted to see if I could do that because it simulated reality in an emergency situation where we may be providing comms. So keep that in mind. So the day for me started at about 2:30 in the morning. Is roughly when I got up. I left the house at 3 a.m. and I had packed the Jeep the night beforehand. Just had one small issue where I failed to be able to get out of the garage easily. The garage door failed and I had to manually open it up. But I had enough room in my itinerary that I planned where the 5 minutes or so didn't make or break anything. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jeep as a really valuable item in this exercise. I had about a 1-hour drive from my home to the regional park, and the first success I had with the Jeep was the 2-meter 440 Kenwood D710 mobile rig I have in there. The night before I had pre-programmed the 4 frequencies, one of which was a repeater, into that radio, and I was actually able to make contact with net control en route and actually a few of the other operators in our group. So really fantastic stuff. When I arrived at the event, I believe it was probably around 4:30 in the morning. It was still dark. I had directions per the communications plan on where to go to find the race command center. I had a hard time. I got turned around a bit. The event staff really weren't looped into where the comms were taking place, so that was my fault. But again, I gave myself plenty of time and ended up finding my location. Turns out I was basically the first person there anyhow, so I had to wait for net control to show up and the communications lead. Now, my shift started at 6 a.m. on location, which was about 4.5 miles from my location and a required 4-wheel drive high clearance vehicle to get to. And I wasn't quite sure how to get there. The communications lead was a little bit behind schedule. So I wasn't able to get to my 6 a.m. on-duty shift on time. And he didn't seem to have a whole lot of problem with it. It actually worked out pretty well. What we ended up doing was I packed out with the medics and the EMTs. And it was a 4.5 mile off-road drive to get to our station, the first aid station on the course. And there were a few sandy washes, a couple of rutted areas where the trucks were having a little bit of a hard time, but the Jeep just went ahead and made it there. So it was beautiful waking up to the sunrise. And then when I got there, I was already decked out with my initial base layers. So I had a t-shirt, a long sleeve, this vest, and then I also had this safety vest, which I wore for the first shift. I'm never gonna wear this again, especially when you have a clipboard. Everybody thought I was in charge. So I'm gonna make out a change where I bought myself a high-vis long sleeve base layer and t-shirt, and I'll just wear that under my normal fleece vest. And I think that'll help minimize the perception that I was in charge, which I was not. So anyways, when we arrived, I think it was maybe 6:30, the first group of runners had come through because it was the 4.5 mile check mark in the race. And really my roles and responsibility at that point were really quite simple. We had an hourly ops normal net check-in, and it was really quite simple. It was a directed net, so net control would come on the air, call each station by their tactical call sign. For example, I was stationed at Coyote Camp, so they would give their preamble, state the tactical call, Coyote Camp. I would get on the air, and it was really quite simple. If I could support myself for 2 hours, it was just Coyote Camp, ops normal, KT1 RUN. So the ops normal check-ins were usually less than a minute or so in length, unless there were any issues, which never really came up. The other responsibility in terms of communication, we're tracking DNFs or runners that did not finish. I had a clipboard where I basically had the timestamp. I would copy the bib number, and what we would do there is essentially traffic that information through net control. And again, since it was a directed net, it would be of this form. I would state my tactical call, Coyote Camp. Net control would respond, Coyote Camp, go ahead. And I would say something to the effect of, I have a DNF, bib number is figures 1, 2, 3, 4 at 07 or 0711. So we would give them the time. And then at that point, we would also go ahead and arrange transport. So if we didn't have event staff there that could traffic or transport the DNFs, we would ask net control for them to dispatch a vehicle. And sometimes that could take upwards of 90 minutes. So there was some logistics around the windows where we were getting lots of dropouts in the event and trying to coordinate all that. And setting expectations with the runners that were obviously exhausted or had some medical issues in terms of getting them out. But no major issues. The other thing of note that was really fun for me is I really connected with the medical team. So there was a lot of downtime, especially in the beginning when the runners were good. Like they had no problem at the 4 mile mark. Almost nobody had any issues at kind of like that marathon point, that second lap, which was about 24-ish miles. So there was a lot of time to really just make sure the event staff had everything they needed. So I helped out with carrying ice, got to know the staff a little bit, really got to know the medical team. Those guys were fantastic. And even helped out with some of the injuries that were coming through. So let's talk about some of the injuries. There were 5 buckets of issues that I saw. First was blisters. That was the highest incident. And I was really surprised that the medical group, they were great, didn't have Moleskine to treat that. So I ended up having to donate a lot of my, actually all of the Moleskine I carried in my first aid Altoids kit. So I think for the next event, I'm certainly going to bring quite a bit more Moleskine just to hand out to be that good guy to help out with morale. The second issue was Cholla, and I would say actually on the first or second loop, a gentleman fell and had Cholla completely covering his entire thigh down to his ankle. And nobody seemed to have a multi-tool. I always carry one since I run into this in the desert all the time. So I assisted the medical crew with either giving them my multi-tool or pulling them out. and at least the big pieces, and they took care of the finer work. So Multitool was absolutely something that I would recommend, and Moleskine for these desert events. There was also ALOC. It had to do with loss of consciousness or people being dizzy. It's an acronym, not a medic. Those people we either had to go to and provide assistance to get back. Blood in the urine was also a big one, especially later in the day when people were starting to hit like the 60-mile or so point in the run, like the third loop. And the recommendation there was just to get them out safely if they could, and then recommend that they go directly to the emergency room to take care of that. And I think the last one was like severe cramping. A lot of people were asking for icy hot. We had to assist a lot of people to get them into the vehicles. They would lock up quite a bit. But in general, those were kind of the medical issues we ran into. And we did support them on comms quite a bit, especially when we were dispatching our medics on foot between stations. All right, so resource utilization was another hot topic for me. I went ahead and captured everything that I used. And so I went through about 4 to 5 40-ounce bottles of water in my clean canteen. I went through 2 coffee packets. I also went through, I think, another 2 more. I made a couple of friends making coffee in one of my short break windows. I had 2 beef jerkies and then MISC food. I brought my own food, but the event staff was so fantastic. They made me like chickpeas sandwiches. They had snacks. I didn't want to tap into it too much, but the main meals I actually ended up just taking their gracious offering, and it was fantastic. I did use 10 minutes worth of the propane butane fuel to make coffee. Not a big deal. They had coffee there, but again, I didn't want to tap into their reserves. Let's talk about battery consumption. The flashlight I used was the S1R Baton 2. This is my EDC flashlight. It is field rechargeable. I used it pretty heavily as a headlamp at night, so really great stuff. I did not go through a full charge, so less than 1 charge on my EDC flashlight, even though I had worked well into the following morning. So I had almost 12 hours of use of this on and off. The iPhone, I went through 3 charges, mostly because I forgot to put it in airplane mode. There was no cell coverage, but I topped it off with my Talent cell about 1.5 times. And we're going to talk about this in a bit. I also use this for field charging one of my radios. I brought more radios than I needed. I brought 2 of the FT60Rs, and I actually went through, I think, 1 full battery and then less than half or quarter of another battery. And I didn't even tap into the extra battery that I brought, the 3rd one. So more than enough battery in terms of the HT usage. Oh, there were toilets there, but I noticed that a few of the porta pods were out of toilet paper. I did raise it to the event staff, but it was nice that I had my own TP kit, so used a few of the TP items. And yeah, I think that's it in terms of like battery consumption. Let's talk really quickly about the radios. I would say the winner absolutely for MVP was this rig and the radio and the Multitool. I was surprised by the battery life of the FT60R. I ran it from 5 a.m. Saturday morning to basically 5 a.m. Sunday morning, and I did not have to switch out the battery until I hit the 18-hour mark. It wasn't completely dead. The voltage was just dropping, and I was getting reports that the radio was starting to be more difficult to be communication grade. And the other cool thing about the radio is I found a really nice way to mount it. Typically, I run my radio on my chest rig with a radio pouch. It's just very cumbersome to get in and out. But it works well when I'm running. But for this event, since I was standing, walking around, it actually clipped very nicely for easy access on the magazine pouch on my plate carrier, or not plate carrier, chest rig. So that's something I want to keep moving forward. The HTs in general had no problem getting into the local repeater even though we were remote. I brought the FT857 just in case, but didn't need to use it if I needed more power. But let's get back to kind of where I ended up with the kit. So at the beginning I had the safety vest, I carried the radio in the safety vest pockets. It worked well enough. I was running the clipboard, and then by the end of the day I really just kind of settled on this system. And that was it. I think that's how I'm going to do future events. And the reason for it was I didn't need to have the larger clipboard based on the data I was capturing. I switched to putting the write in the rain notebook right in front with my pencil. I was charging things a bit, so I kept the talent cell in here, and then I had the extra battery pack. And then in the evenings, I was using the gloves for a handful of things to keep warm and also work with the fire, and also for carrying some stuff that made it easier. So this setup was absolutely phenomenal and will be kind of how I configure my kit in the future for events. In terms of fuel charging, I found something really cool. So I had mentioned in the last video where I brought the cradle for the FT60R. As it turns out, the talent cell batteries that I'm using for my Raspberry Pi power source at home or in the field with the 5-volt USB works great. It's got the on-off option, but it also is at the heart a 12-volt output. So quite honestly, since I had the two radios, when one radio was down, all I had to do was take the connector for the 12-volt output, and the Yaesu FT60R, which is absolutely my favorite radio, has 12-volt input. We turn it on, and now we're charging. This is a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. I'll put a link below if you guys want to help support the channel. But lots of different applications. So like I said, I'm using this talent cell now for field recharging my HT. I'm using it to top off the 5-volt devices like my phone. And I'm also using it to power the Raspberry Pi in the field. So I actually have like 3 of these now, and it's my go-to power source. All right, so the other thing that I found was shelter system, and I'm going to include my personal layering. So the layering system was absolutely phenomenal. In the morning when it was cold, I just wore my base layer shirt, the long sleeve shirt, and I was pretty warm with the gloves. And then as soon as the sun came up, took off that top layer, perfectly fine. Going into the evening, re-added that long sleeve base layer, threw on the puffer jacket later in the evening, and even put on the gloves. So my temperature management was pretty good. We did have a bonfire, which was really exciting. The event staff did a little bit of a show there with the bonfire. We had Mr. Heaters connected to the propane tanks. We had a lot of issues with those, and we're constantly trying to get those to work. But it was nice at night to have people around the various fire sources as we were getting to know the runners and just had some downtime in general. Oh yeah, and the temperature swing was almost 40 degrees. The low was about 52 and the high was 92. In fact, there were quite a few runners that were from out of state that considered 92 to be very hot, and I can see that. For me, it was absolutely beautiful, perfect temperature, but we had some reports of runners coming through that were dropping out because of the heat. Again, I have a very biased view of what's hot out here, just because I train in the desert and live in the desert. So keep that in mind if you're going to an out-of-state venue to be aware of the climate. Oh, so I didn't end up sleeping. So my relief came in at 1700 hours on Saturday. George, he brought his drone and took some wonderful aerial photography for us. And I ended up just hanging out with him, getting to know another ham, and ended up working my second shift, which was supposed to be my 5 or 6 hour break. And then he ended up doing the same thing. He was supposed to take a break when I started, and we ended up working together till 5 a.m. He actually ended up finishing around 7. So that was interesting. I didn't get to use the modular sleep system. That was the bivy tent with the USGI poncho and whoopee. So I'll do another video on that at some point. So other gear that I did not use was the Yaesu 857D. That's my portable 100, 50, and 20 watt rig. And I don't know if I would bring it next time. I think I'm going to rely, if I have access to the Jeep, the crossband repeat capability within the Jeep on the Kenwood. But I do have another radio. All right, guys, I'm back. So I think I found the radio that I want to use for public service events if I need more power, but still need to be mobile and don't have access to the crossband repeat on the Jeep. And this is the Yaesu FTM 6000R. It's the newest lineup from Yaesu. I bought this for portable work. It's a 2-meter 440 rig that has a data port, so I can do things like APRS. I'm in the process of designing a set of Armorlock TPA pack frame rails, and we're calling that the TTP 6000, the Tech Prepper 6000, because I've been trying to have Seth from Armorlock tweak that based on the configuration I want to have. That'll be the next video. Long story short is I want to start experimenting with this voice and digital radio using the data port for emergency communication that has a very small footprint. So more on that later. It's the new hotness in terms of radios, and I think it's going to be fantastic. I've been experimenting with it for a while. I also received a couple of pro tips that I think you guys should be aware of. When I went ahead and did the planning video, I mentioned that I would be bringing a clipboard, and someone recommended bring a transparent clipboard because you can write on the front, but then if you have a map like at this wilderness event, you can put it in reverse and you've got the map on back. So I'll put a link down below where I got this. They have them up to 5 packs for just a few bucks. This one cost me $8 since I went with the single one, but really great tip. Thanks to the viewer who did recommend that. And then I was talking to a local ham where I was talking about the drone footage that we're using to capture some B-roll, and he said, hey, that would be interesting when you guys had to deploy a medic and yourself out 1.5 miles out. It would have been cool to use the drone the other ham had as reconnaissance. And then he even went so far to say is even use the drone to drop a small payload for medical supplies, for in the case of a heart attack, maybe some nitro. You get the point. There's some really cool applications that other people have been contributing based on my debrief of the event. Well, guys, I had probably missed way too much here, have been talking for too long. Point is, I had an absolute blast at this event. I loved the whole wilderness aspect of it. Everybody I met, from the event staff to the guys at MCECG, the medical group, the runners, everybody was amazing. I'm going to do this again. I've got one lined up for February in Black Canyon City, which should be fun. And I'm going to take all of these lessons learned and take it to the next level. I'm experimenting with my MCOM tools package for the next event. So we're going to try trafficking data in a secondary format for to see how that works as kind of a test bed when we have some downtime. All right, guys, I'm the Tech Prepper. Be strong, be safe, and be prepared. I probably went overboard with the packing, but I wanted to see if I could be self-supporting this is not where I want to go with this video.